For 85 years, West Toronto's transportation service has been provided from this location. On February 18, 1996, all service came to an end. This video relates only a small part of Lansdowne Division's history and was made to commemorate its closing. In May 1911, the largest Toronto Railway Company carhouse was opened on Lansdowne Avenue. Constructed of red brick, it was very modern for its time. It housed 108 large cars, and the 12-track yard held another 132 cars. In 1921, as part of the TTC's acquisition of car properties, Lansdowne Carhouse became the home base for service on Bloor, Carleton, Harbord, Bathurst, and the Spadina Beltline. Most inherited Toronto Railway cars were in horrible shape. Some were used as emergency cars carrying tools for breakdowns or derailments. Others were upgraded to TTC standards. Most were retired in 1921. Toronto summers must have been a welcome time for streetcar motormen and conductors. Open cars were favored for a breezy trip to a picnic area or a bathing beach. In the early days of Toronto's street rail history, these cars would provide romantic excursions for many a young couple. But alas, with the growing number of automobile accidents, they were banned from Toronto streets in 1915. In cold weather, the Toronto Railway Company cars were heated by a Gurney Oxford coal stove located behind the motorman's station. It was the responsibility of the conductor to keep the stove stoked, but the only heat he'd receive would be from the body heat of the passengers because his station was at the rear of the car. Above the rear window was a hook where the conductor would hang a mother's baby carriage. You could tell by their clothing who was the conductor and who was the motorman. A life-saving fender was mounted on the car's front to prevent jaywalkers from slipping under the car's wheels. These cars had doors at both the front and rear. Riders would enter from the rear, deposit their fares in a handheld fare box, and leave by the front door when their stop was reached. A steel guard was placed under the front doorstep in front of the wheels to prevent small animals from running under the car. Public ownership of Toronto streetcar companies also meant new rules and regulations, as well as new uniforms. Car 1704 later became Rail Grinder W25 and is presently under restoration at the Halton County Radial Railway in Milton. The TTC undertook a massive track rehabilitation program in 1922. In order to allow new streetcar operation to proceed, old track work had to be replaced. By 1928, the Toronto Railway Company track work from Lappin Avenue to Lansdowne Carhouse was replaced using crane car C2, and the wide devil strip between the two tracks now allowed modern equipment to pass. The most distinctive feature of the Lansdowne Carhouse was its covered ladder track. Most carhouses' ladder track into the barns were exposed to the elements, but Lansdowne's design was more typical of an American car barn. The skylights above provided lighting for operating personnel. Servicing of the cars was made more efficient with concrete-lined pits. Later adjustments were made to accommodate the large Peter Witt cars. As modern as this carhouse was in its day, the wooden supports were evident when the carhouse was closed in 1996. Unlike the Toronto Railway Company car days, the TTC's maintenance stores were kept in a neat, tidy condition for streetcar repair and traction motor maintenance. The traffic office, while Spartan and austere by today's standards, still reflected a neat and orderly appearance. I assure you that what appears as cobwebs in this photo are only scratches on the photo's surface. Be assured that this area was cleared out for this photograph. With the number of employees working from this carhouse, the area would be very crowded. The sign-up board and counters looked like fine furniture in a room that had high ceilings and an airy feeling to it. Individual gas lamps illuminated the sign-up board. Handheld fare boxes and transfers were distributed by the slip clerk, much in the same manner as today. Employees' uniforms became less railway-looking. Lansdowne Division's employees have established a winning attitude throughout the years. The trophy case is full of employee achievements. The Carhouse also had snow fighting equipment on standby to keep the cars running in the worst of winter weather. When warranted, plows and sweepers would clear the snow to maintain service. The TTC had acquired all 17 of the Toronto Railway Company's snow sweepers. West Toronto was called the Junction because this was where various railway lines connected. Rail maintenance yards and stockyards located there supported a thriving local economy. Streetcars brought the workers to the area, and it was not long before more industries and homes were built. The TTC decided that off-street loops were necessary to replace on-street Ys. Automobile traffic had increased to such an extent that the practice of turning back streetcars on the street was dangerous. The harbored cars, which normally wide at Lansdowne and Lappin, were extended north to Royce Loop at present-day DuPont Street, and the track at Lappin and Lansdowne was rebuilt. Further south, the old TR track at Bloor and Lansdowne was also rehabilitated, as this was the main pull-in and pull-out track serving the routes out of Lansdowne. By the mid-1920s, these Lansdowne-based ex-Toronto Railway Company cars were the division's workhorses. In November of 1921, Lansdowne Avenue service was provided by College Toronto Railway Company cars that had been transferred from Dundas Division. The College TRs ran from the new Royce Loop south to College to Bay and then to Union Station. The original Lansdowne North route was operated from St. Clair Division with two-man cars from a Y at St. Clair to a crossover at the grade crossing just north of Royce. The second man set the derail switch on the hill. In 1933, when the railway underpass was completed, two-man ex-Civic double-ended cars were transferred to Lansdowne Carhouse and operated from a new loop at St. Clair to a crossover just north of College Street. And by the summer, one-man double-ended Civic cars provided base service on Lansdowne. Double-ended cars had changeable seats that would be reversed when they reached the end of the line. Smart riders would provide their own seat cushions. Based at Lansdowne, they also ran on Weston Road. The unique feature of this route was a turn-back off-street terminal at Keele and Dundas. This terminal kept passenger lineups off of Keele Street. These cars provided service on Spadina until 1948, when they were replaced by GMTDH 4507 buses. The real improvement in Toronto's transit service was the introduction of the all-steel-bodied Peter Witt pay-as-you-pass center-exit streetcar. By 1922, 50 additional Preston-built Brill Witts were acquired. As track was rebuilt to accommodate these new cars, they began service on the College line. As more Peter Witt cars arrived, they provided base service on Bloor, which was now through-routed to Jane Street. In 1996, much has changed at Dundas and Bloor from 1921. The Crossways complex occupies the northeast corner, and the Dundas West subway station is nestled to the left. The building in the background still exists today as a flea market. Jane Loop opened on the last day of 1921. These cars had wooden slat seats and improved heating and lighting. They were two-man cars in the beginning, but were later changed to one-man cars. By 1937, passenger comfort was getting the attention. Padded seats and linoleum floors were added. Handrails remained wooden, but the stained wood interior would later be painted cream color. The Peter Witt streetcar served Toronto well and was responsible for helping develop the city's outlying suburbs. To accommodate increased crosstown traffic on the Bloor line, the Wade trailer yard was enlarged in 1925. The entrance to the yard was from Lansdowne Avenue, but quick access to Bloor was from a double-track private right-of-way section adjacent to the yard. Complete trains would enter the yard in the evening, and without uncoupling the trailers, they would go into service in the morning rush hour. Trailer train operation was made obsolete by the introduction of the President's Conference Committee car. The PCC first arrived on the St. Clair line in 1938, and a short while later, 24 of these streamliners replaced an equal number of trailer trains on the Crosstown Bloor line. Quick accelerating, quiet and modern, these cars were an operator's dream. A cushioned seat with foot controls afforded the operator hands-free control of the car and enabled him to handle fares, make change, and give out transfers, all while the car was in motion. But from a union point of view, the new car's arrival posed a threat to employment. With the rapid growth of ridership and the ability to reassign older operators to other two-man car divisions, these problems were kept under control. As rapid expansion of the PCC service began in the 1940s, the world was at war, and employees from Lansdowne Division served Canada well. The war created a shortage of gasoline and tires. The TTC ordered more new PCCs to handle the increased war traffic. While Peter Witz had taken over daily base service on the Lansdowne route prior to 1947, PCC cars after 1947 provided the night owl service, as it was called, for shift workers to the numerous industries along the route. One night in January 1947, about 3 a.m., a northbound Lansdowne PCC 4063 went through an open switch and veered towards the Carhouse, derailing, hitting the north wall, and dislodging the support column, which in turn brought the roof down on the car. Luckily, the operator was not seriously injured, and there were no passengers on the car. The PCC, however, had the distinction of being the first streamliner to be scrapped. Lansdowne was the home to the Lost Articles office, and judging by the expression on the clerk's face, he was not having a ball with the numerous lost umbrellas. In 1947, the TTC took delivery of its first all-electric PCC. This experimental version, 4398, was not popular with the operators because of its sealed windows and noisy ventilation fans, and was later standardized to conform to the regular PCC design. After delivery, the 4300 PCCs became a regular fixture on Bloor, Carleton, and the Harvard routes. In this 1947 photo, the all-electrics are posed with older Wits awaiting assignment. The wartime gray trolley shroud would later be painted cream color. Earlier in 1946, Lansdowne Division was introduced to the Canadian Car and Foundry CCF Brill trolley coach. The CCF demonstrator was tested on overhead wire installed beside the car barn. TTC staff and maintenance personnel witnessed a test of this modern electric bus, which would replace streetcars on Weston Road and provide new service on routes such as Annette, Ossington, and Lansdowne. It didn't take long for the TTC to order these new coaches. They arrived in the winter of 1947, and 3 tracks adjacent to the Carhouse were set aside for storage. The coaches had one-piece route-only signs, both front and side, when they were first put into service. The interior seating was typical of the period, with double seats on each side of the center aisle in wartime green upholstery. The only portion of the Lansdowne Avenue track to be removed was the section between St. Clair and Davenport. The remaining trackage was retained for Carhouse movements for the streetcar lines originating from Lansdowne. The original Lansdowne Yard snow scraper remained on the property until 1954, but other cars were soon retired. The modern trolleybus era began with a Brill coach pulling out from Patton Road onto Lansdowne June 19, 1947. Many changes were made to the Carhouse with the arrival of the electric buses. Double overhead was installed inside the barn, as well as a new bus washing rack. Increased passenger loads on the Bloor-Danforth line resulted in the TTC purchasing 100 multiple-unit all-electric PCC cars in 1949. 4400 and 4401 were displayed to the public in August of 1949 at the C&E. The cars initially ran as single units, and official multiple-unit operation was delayed until March 13, 1950, while the TTC and the Union solved the two-man streetcar issue. Modification had to be made to the loops in order to accommodate the wide swing of the two-car trains. Electric track switches were modified to allow multiple-unit trains to operate with each car drawing current through its own pole. The access to the new Yonge subway for passengers on Bloor-Danforth streetcars was provided by the Yonge Bloor transfer platform, which was located in the middle of Bloor Street. Passenger traffic increased during the 50s, and while these cars provided efficient base service for the Bloor-Danforth riders, other routes had less reliable rolling stock. The 1950s also marked the TTC's first purchase of second-hand cars from American cities that had abandoned streetcars. Toronto had not experienced automobile mania to the same extent that the U.S. had. But by the 1960s, transit decisions had begun to be made based on rapid rather than on a street-running basis. The Bloor-Danforth crosstown route brought passengers from the west and from the east to the Yonge subway. The Bloor-Danforth PCCs were shared by both Lansdowne and Danforth divisions. The eastern terminus of the line was Luttrell Loop, where passengers would transfer to suburban bus lines. The Harvard route was possibly the most interesting one in the entire TTC system, as it wound its way from Pape and Danforth, downtown, crosstown, and then uptown to St. Clair and Old Weston Road. It also ran along the former Beltline route up Spadina Avenue and around the Spadina Circle, where the new Spadina Light Rail line will run in 1997. Except for rail fans, no passenger would take the Harvard streetcar from one end of the line to the other, so operators on this route had a diversity of patrons. The other major crosstown route that ran out of both Lansdowne and Danforth divisions was the Carleton line. During the 1950s and 60s, PCC equipment would be assigned to each division, and the cars running out of that carhouse would be the same. There would be no mixing of rolling stock, so an operator would know the handling and running characteristics of each car. Without a doubt, this was the golden age of Toronto surface rail. Carleton cars would run out of Lansdowne Carhouse, across Bloor, down Lansdowne to College, where they would go into service. By 1952, Toronto's Peter Witt fleet was reaching the point where they had to be retired, and the production of new PCC cars in North America had stopped. It was also not practical to convert streetcar lines to electric bus operations. The TTC was fortunate to purchase second-hand cars from various U.S. cities. 25 St. Louis-built ex-Cleveland PCCs, originally intended for use in Louisville, Kentucky, were purchased by the TTC in 1952. Originally, these cars ran on Kingston Road and were based at Russell Division, but later they were assigned to Danforth. On this occasion, a railfan charter proceeded to back the newly acquired Cleveland PCC into the George Street Rail Yard. When the same maneuver was attempted at Lansdowne Carhouse, the trolley pole was bent with the backup move and had to be replaced. It was lucky for the charter that it happened at the Carhouse, where there was an ample supply of poles. This was the first time that these cars ever appeared at Lansdowne Division. The only time the ex-Cleveland Louisville PCCs would ever reach Lansdowne Carhouse would be on a change-off with Danforth. This view from the front window of a PCC of two Witt streetcars paying their last visit to the Carhouse before retiring from Toronto streets is the only film that exists of the inside of the northern portion of the barn. The TTC also purchased 15 second-hand Marmon Harrington electric trolley buses from Cincinnati, Ohio in 1953. Which ran on Weston Road. 8 additional Marmons, purchased second-hand from Cleveland in 1963, ran primarily on Ossington. The Cincinnati trolley coaches were larger and seated 44 passengers, while the shorter Cleveland Marmons seated 38, after one set of double seats were replaced with a row of single seats. The 1960s were the golden years for charters by rail fans, and Toronto became a mecca for enthusiasts from all over the world. They would delight in retracing the old routes that had been abandoned. The Peterwood backup move into the junction turnback at the former Weston Road car terminal was one such event. Even though Weston Road streetcar service ended in 1947, the terminal track was still used for Dundas short turn cars until 1968. When the Toronto Transit Commission was formed in 1954, rapid transit expansion was a priority. By 1961, construction was underway for the University Subway, which would eventually be extended north as the Spadina Subway. Motormen had to be cautious of pedestrians, as this phase of subway construction at Avenue Road detoured the multiple unit cars around the construction area on the south sidewalk. 6 years later, construction would be complete on the Bloor-Danforth subway, and these MU trains would be history. Coincident with the opening of the University Subway was the removal of streetcars on DuPont and the extension of the Annette trolley bus to meet the subway at St. George Station. From Christie Loop, we take a quick trip to Bedford Road, where the Annette line would now run. On February 28, 1963, Ivor Walsh, standing on the corner of Bedford Road and Davenport, captured the end of an era with the running of the last regular service Peter Witt trolley in Toronto on the DuPont line, filled with trolley fans, followed by a new Bay GM diesel bus. At the same time, the civic officials gathered at St. George subway station to open the University Subway, and the first extended Annette bus was a GM diesel. St. George Station had 2 trolley bus platforms, but the second was rarely used. With the extension of the Annette trolley coach from Christie Loop, this route now became a major crosstown line. At Ossington and DuPont, a spider's web of overhead wires allowed for various turns. In 1960, the Ossington service was extended to Eglinton and Gilbert after the Oakwood streetcar was retired. Lansdowne trolley buses negotiated the S-curve on the hill with ease. By 1966, Lansdowne passengers could be dropped off at the subway station at Bloor Street. Track connections from Bloor south to College had been severed by 1967, and Lansdowne Garage was now the official designation. In 1966, for a short 2-year period, Bloor streetcars ran in shuttle service from an off-street loop at the Keele subway station at Indian Grove to Jane Street. They also made a connection at Keele subway station with the Weston Road trolley coaches. One interesting note about Weston Road service was the fact that Brill coaches 9075 to 9084 initially were issued Ontario public vehicle plates because the route passed through 3 municipalities. This practice ceased when Metropolitan Toronto was formed in 1954. The Ossington trolley coach was also connected with the Bloor-Danforth subway. In 1953, most of the 40T 48A Canada Car Brill trolley coaches were assigned to Lansdowne Division. These large Brills had double-screen front and rear doors, so they could readily gobble up the crowds on this heavily traveled route. In 1968, Lansdowne Carhouse became the Lansdowne Garage, and a new trolley bus route was inaugurated, the Junction Line. It ran from Dundas West Station to the Runnymede Loop, replacing the northern part of the Dundas Car Line. By 1967, the majority of the electric bus fleet was 20 years old, and the TTC was convinced that Toronto's electric bus system would be economically viable for at least another 20 years. In 1967, Brill Coach 9020 was involved in an accident that disabled the vehicle. The TTC announced in May of that year that this bus would be sent to Winnipeg to be remanufactured by Western Flyer Coach Limited. A former Ottawa bus, 9144, was also sent to England, but never returned intact. When 9020 returned, it had been completely rebuilt, sporting a contemporary design. Lengthy tests were conducted on the bus for almost 2 years while reports were filed with the TTC as to the feasibility and costs involved in rebuilding the entire fleet. By 1969, the program was approved and funds were allotted for the purchase of 151 bodies and chassis from Western Flyer. In September of 1970, the TTC received 5 unpainted bodies and installed the reconditioned electrical equipment at Hillcrest shops. The completed coaches were fitted with new seats, interior appointments, and painted in TTC colors. An additional 10 Halifax and 12 Cornwall brills were acquired for their electrical components. 2 of the outshopped Flyer electric buses were chartered by local fans for an excursion from Lansdowne Division on a sunny Sunday in 1972. The northern terminus of the Weston Road trolley coach line was altered from Blondin Loop to a cloverleaf at Albion Road, coincident with the widening of the 401 freeway to the south. Special heavy-duty poles were installed to support bracket arms that kept the trolley wire in place. One of the many difficulties operators and motorists alike had to get used to was the limited mobility of electric buses. With their poles attached to overhead wires, they were less maneuverable than a regular bus, and their drivers quickly learned how to negotiate turns. This seldom used short-turn loop between Beresford and Runnymede was an active loop prior to the Bloor subway extensions to Islington in 1968. Driving these large coaches through these side streets, lined on both sides with parked cars, was an acquired skill. The new Flyers were equipped with a water bumper for low-impact collisions. By 1971, the older trolley buses were beginning to disappear as the Flyer coaches were outshopped. The scene at Kiel and Annette of 3 different types of electric buses all passing one another is a one-of-a-kind sequence. The Marmon Harringtons were non-standard equipment, and only the motors and controls were put in the Flyers. From this vantage point, it looks as if the GM diesel has sprouted trolley poles, but it would be 20 years before Toronto would get to see a GM trolley bus in service. Lansdowne still had some 1500s still in special service in the early 1970s. Even though no wire connected the Eglinton trolley coach lines to Lansdowne Division, the coaches shared the same routes on the roll signs. The Jane, Runnymede, Schuyler Road, Eglinton West, Dufferin, Kiel, and Westmount diesel bus routes ran out of Lansdowne. Older grey coach buses were based here for school charter service. By this time, all traces of streetcar operation were gone. A fueling station was installed to take care of the diesel buses, and additional trolley wire was installed in the yard. Ventilation fans were installed on the roof to eliminate diesel fumes in the garage. Some track was still visible leading into the garage and out of it, but it would soon be paved over. By 1972, all 151 T8 class Flyers were running, and the can car brills and Marmons were but a memory. The new buses received the traction motors, compressors, governors, trolley poles, control packages, other mechanical components, and even the trolley shrouds from the older buses. This major in-house building of a completely new bus did not go unnoticed by other transit properties in North America. In March of 1971, Flyer 9213 began a demonstration run in Dayton, Ohio, which would later lead to a prototype Flyer being built at Hillcrest shops for that system. 9213 also ran in service in Boston and in Hamilton, as well as visiting Edmonton, Calgary, Milwaukee, Detroit, and Philadelphia. Logging 30,000 miles in its travels, it returned in April of 1972. The TTC's rebuilding program caught on, and soon some of these cities were interested in investing resources and rebuilding their trackless trolley fleets. Boston and Hamilton remanufactured their coaches using Western Flyer bodies, while Philadelphia ordered new AM Generals that are still running in service in 1996. By 1968, the Ossington trolley bus was cut back from Gilbert Loop to an on-street loop at Eglinton and Oakwood, and by 1978, it was extended east along Eglinton to the new Spadina subway. Oakwood was the only street that shared both streetcars and trolley bus operation in regular service. Today, the route is dieselized.